Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's get started. Wall Street indices extended gains for the second week in a row, driven by post-election euphoria and positive economic data. In a holiday-shortened trading week in the U.S., global investors digested a flood of economic news from Japan and Europe. Markets in Europe advanced, but political turmoil in France overshadowed trading sentiment, and weak economic growth kept pressure on the euro. The prospect of a rate hike in Japan rose after Tokyo area inflation stayed above 2% and the yen strengthened sharply. Let us begin review of key economic metrics in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The U.S. economy expanded at a steady pace in the third quarter, largely powered by broad-based consumer spending and steady business investment, the second estimate from the government agency showed. New home sales dropped to an annual rate of 610,000 from the unrevised 738,000 and fell at the fastest pace since 2013 and dropped to the lowest level since October 2022. After two hurricanes, Helene and Milton, impacted housing activities. New home sales dropped 9.3% from a year ago, driven by a 19.7% plunge in sales in the South. The median home price increased to $437,300, and the average home price rose to $545,800, an increase of $11,000 from the previous month for both measures. The annual personal consumption expenditures price index edged higher to 2.3% in October from 2.1% in September, and the core index, which excludes food and energy, advanced to 2.8% from 2.7% in the previous month. The alternative measure of inflation understates the inflation faced by most families because it accounts for consumers substituting cheaper products to meet monthly needs. Consumer price inflation in the Eurozone advanced 2.3% from a year ago in November from 2% in October. The rebound in inflation was driven by base effects after the sharp fall in energy prices last year was no longer available for annual calculations. India's GDP growth in the September quarter moderated to 5.7% from 6.7% in the previous quarter and 8.1% in the period a year ago. The growth rate was sharply lower than 7% projected by the Reserve Bank of India. Sluggish manufacturing sector growth of 2.2% and a weak rebound in agriculture sector of 3.5% overshadowed the 7.1% increase in the service sector and 7.7% rise in construction sector. In other economic news, Spain, France, and Germany reported inflation that matched expectations. Economic growth in the third quarter slowed in Switzerland but accelerated in France, and UK mortgage approvals rose to the highest level since August of 2022. Japan's retail sales, jobless data, and industrial production met expectations laid out by the Bank of Japan. But core consumer price inflation in November in the Tokyo area rose, suggesting a strong underlying inflationary pressures. Profits at large industrial Chinese companies declined 10% from a year ago in October. The annual profit decline slowed from a 27% fall in the previous month amid uneven economic recovery, a depressed property market, and weak consumer demand. In the first 10 months of the year to October, profit decline accelerated to 4.3% from 3.5% in the previous year-to-month period. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury hovered at 4.2% and stayed near a 5-month high as investors factored in fewer rate cuts than previously estimated after the latest PCE price index met expectations. Texas crude oil price decreased 3% to $69 a barrel ahead of the OPEC Plus meeting on Sunday, amid expectations that the group will delay the previously announced production increase because of weak demand, growth outlook, and supply glut. Natural gas prices in Europe rose to a two-year high of €47.75 per megawatt hour, driven by expectations of cooler temperatures in December. Gas storages in Europe are about 86% full, 10 percentage points lower than last year, but raising supply disruption risks. The euro hovered near a two-year low of $1.05 and suffered a 3% decline in November amid a weak economic outlook and possible trade confrontation with the U.S. The yen advanced to 150 after Tokyo metro area inflation rebounded, supporting the case for the Bank of Japan to raise rates at the next meeting in December. We now shift our attention to major stock markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq composite advanced less than 1% after an inflation update suggested that the Fed may take a slower approach in lowering rates at the next meeting in 2 weeks. The European markets closed mixed, and France's political turmoil overshadowed market sentiment in the currency union. The Nikkei 225 stock average declined for the third consecutive week as investors adjusted to a possible rate hike at the next policy meeting in 2 weeks. Hong Kong and China indices edged slightly higher, but worries of economic slowdown, weak consumer sentiment, and slower exports loomed large in trade. Indian market indices traded down amid worries about a slowdown in growth in urban spending and corporate earnings. For the month of November, the U.S. indices led the world markets, and indices in France and China struggled. Post-election rally in the U.S. supported the market advance, and French political turmoil dragged the market sentiment on the worry of a fall of the minority government, and indices in Hong Kong fell. Fiscal stimulus failed to revive consumer sentiment and property market. Let us shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings update from leading companies last week. Dell Technologies declined 13% after the company posted a weaker than expected fiscal third quarter results. HP Incorporated dropped 8% after the personal computing company estimated weaker than expected adjusted earnings in the fiscal 2025 first quarter. Workday plunged 12% after the human resource software company estimated lower than expected revenue and operating margin in the fourth quarter. Zoom Video Communications decreased 5% to $84 after the video communication company reported fiscal fourth quarter earnings that met investors' expectations. Best Buy company declined 5% after the consumer electronics retailer reported weaker than estimated revenue and earnings in the third quarter. Abercrombie & Fitch, the specialty apparel retailer, reported third quarter results and lifted full-year sales outlook. Dick's Sporting Goods jumped 8% after the outdoor goods retailer reported strong third quarter earnings and lifted its annual outlook driven by demand improvement during the back-to-school shopping season. Bath & Body Works jumped 15% after the specialty retailer reported better than expected results in the third quarter. Delivery Hero, the Germany-based food delivery company, set the price at the upper end of its filing range for its Middle Eastern unit's initial public offering. Heidelberg Materials, the German cement company, agreed to acquire the U.S.-based Giant Cement and its subsidiaries, controlled by Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim, for $600 million. Direct Line Insurance soared 42% after the UK-based insurance company rejected a hostile £3.3 billion offer from Aviva. JustEatTakeaway.com, the food delivery company, announced its plan to delist from the London Stock Exchange, citing low trading volume and high listing costs. In the week ahead, investors are looking forward to the release of jobs report and JOLT report in the U.S. Investors are estimating net new job growth to expand by 15,000 from 183,000 in October, unemployment rate to hold steady at 4.1%, and wage growth to slow to 0.3%, 0.4%. In Europe, investors are looking forward to the release of manufacturing surveys in Spain, Italy, and Switzerland. Germany's factory orders are likely to drop, and France's manufacturing production is expected to rebound from a decline in the previous month. The euro area jobless rate is expected to hover near a record low of 6.2%, and retail sales are likely to fall in the region for the first time in 4 months. In China, investors are looking forward to the release of official and Kaizen manufacturing surveys, and in Japan, investors are eyeing speeches from officials ahead of the rate decisions in the second week in December. Reserve Bank of India is likely to hold rates steady amid a surge in food prices in October and loosen its stance on liquidity. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on Redera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com, review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see you next week.